Hello, everybody. My name is Sinéad Burke. Thank you for joining this webinar today. Just now, we're giving everybody a couple of minutes to join. To start, I'll give a visual description of myself. I'm a white cisgendered woman. I have brown shoulder-length hair, and today I am wearing a brown knitted jumper. I'm standing in front of a gray backdrop, and I'm actually here in New York City. So while some of you may be joining us in the evening time, it's just about hitting the mid-afternoon here. As I shared, my name is Sinead. I am the CEO and founder of Tilting the Lens. Tilting the Lens is a strategic accessibility consultancy. Our ambition is to create the conditions for disabled people to be successful. We do that across built environment, product and service design, and people and workplace culture. We are a disability-owned business. We have a majority disabled team, and our work is about creating those system changes, but by always doing it with disabled people, never for them. That is very much part of our webinar strategy. And the reason why we bring people together, those we admire, our clients also, who we also admire, and community, to try to create open sourced learnings and insights that we can all embed into our businesses and day-to-day practice. Over the past year, we've had some really strong conversations around accessibility in arts and culture, engaging with activists and advocates from India, engaging with those who are working in museums and cultural spaces. And today we're having a really interesting and important conversation around TV and film, but from the broadest possible lens and landscape. We're going to be talking about what it means to be a chief people officer in a public service broadcaster that also has shareholders, and what it means to create the conditions for disabled people to be successful. But we're also going to be talking to somebody who is in the early stages of their career and journey, who is already proving what it means to be disabled in the editing room and the impact of projects, narratives, representation, and storytelling. I mean, I hope you already know who they are, because it's with great excitement that we've brought them together. So today we'll be talking to Adi Rawcliffe, the Chief People Officer at ITV, and Bella Roberts, who's an extraordinary editor who just moments ago got back from starting a new job just this week. But before we go any further, I want to just spotlight and be mindful of the accessibility accommodations that we have in place. We're joined by Anne-Marie and Chloe, our BSL interpreters, and we're joined by Bo, our live captioner, who is also making a live transcription available. I'm also joined in the back end by some fantastic colleagues. Laia, Emma, and Rowena are all on hand and available to support should you have any challenges or access considerations that we can help with. Just send them a message or put a message into the chat, and they will respond to solve them as quickly as possible. But this is live. This is accessibility in action. So it may take us a couple of minutes to just focus on the spotlighting, figure out what access looks like for you. I'd be grateful for your patience as we map that out. So I feel like we should get started and really have this conversation. But in advance, one last note, I really want to hear from you. So to give you a sense of what's going to happen, I'm going to invite Adi to the virtual stage first. She and I are going to talk for about 20 minutes. Then we'll bring Bella out and we'll talk to Bella for about 20 minutes. Then both Ade and Bella are going to come back and we're going to facilitate a Q&A with the questions that you have asked. So what I would love for you to even think about now, what's the question you have for Adi? What's the question you have for Bella? What's the idea that you have that's relevant to your business or your industry or your community practice? Ask those questions as early as possible, and they will be filtered to us, almost like magic, to be able to get those answers to people. So I think we should get started. I'm really pleased to be able to welcome Adi Rawcliffe, the Chief People Officer at ITV. And I should say, for transparency purposes, before going ahead, that I have the great privilege of holding the role of Chair of the Cultural Advisory Council of ITV, which means over that time, I've had the great honor of getting to know Adi personally and professionally. And previously, Adi held the role of Chief Diversity Officer at ITV. And I have learned a huge amount from her. And seeing her soar into the Chief People Officer role with that same mindset and approach. I was really excited to bring her to this webinar. But Adi, I don't want to embarrass you with this, overly long introduction, though it is absolutely deserved. First, Adi, I might come to you for a brief visual description and then we'll dive into the conversation.
Yes, hello. I am Adi. My visual description is that I am a black woman of Nigerian heritage, should I be honest, in my early 50s, wearing a green top, very bright green top.
I didn't volunteer my age or information, so I feel like I should reciprocate. I'm just about to be 35. Thank you, Adi. One of the reasons why we really wanted to bring you into the conversation is that when we think about the topic of inclusive media or accessible film and television, rightfully so, much of the focus of the conversation comes about as representation on screen or access coordinators or thinking about where possible, what does post-production look like in terms of accessibility, or thinking about captionings, audio description, sign language interpretation on film. But one of the things that I've learned from you is that, when we think about people who work in television, we often don't think about those, that is in every broadcaster who, works in legal, works in HR, works in procurement, and everybody works to serve the creation of great content.
Mhm.
So I guess, reflecting back, what sparked your interest in working in this industry and what continues to keep you motivated?
Yeah, no, thank you very much for having me. I'm really delighted to be here. And, you play such an important role, keeping us honest and challenging us and supporting us at ITV. So thank you very much. So it's great to be here with you today. I think for me is the simple thing is that I always liked watching telly when I was growing up. And I had Nigerian parents who told me off for watching too much television. And now I've got the last laugh because look at my job. That's where it all comes from. And I started off very much in front of sort of making content. So I'm a producer, a commissioning editor, all those sorts of things, which very much is in the service of content. But I realized that what I loved more than being directly involved in making the content was recognizing talent in others and helping them develop from various different backgrounds. That's the sort of biggest thrill of my job. And what keeps me motivated? What keeps me motivated is sometimes I hear myself talking and I think, oh my goodness, she's still banging on about DEI. And I just think I'm just going to keep banging on till things have changed. So what excites me is the opportunity for progress, sort of in terms of people that are working behind the camera in our organization and also on screen, and all those great stories and all that talent that we haven't yet had access to. That's what keeps me excited, even in the days when I feel a little bit tired.
I think it's that reality, isn't it? That there's always more work to do. And sometimes it feels like we take a step back. Sometimes it feels like we take 3 steps forward, but this work will never be done, which sometimes only makes us feel slightly more tired. But to your point, only motivates us further. You talked there around DE&I, and for anybody who doesn't know, that's diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that was most recently, prior to this role as Chief People Officer, your title. But I guess, what does a chief people officer do? What does that role entail? And then how are you bringing that kind of DE&I lens or approach to shape what it is you do now day to day?
It's so I've been in post for 6 months now, and I have so much respect for chief people officers now having done that job for 6 months. I used to think, what do they do all day? And it turns out quite a lot. So what my role is, essentially, I see myself as being responsible for driving the culture in the organization. So across everybody that works there, being responsible for all the people that work in our organization globally, whether that's people working in our HQ or whether it's people working in Fiji on Love Island. It's the sort of full gamut of that, but it sort of falls into things that you you would know about sort of like hiring and unhiring and onboarding and all those sorts of things. But then there's also lots of work around my team looks after our facilities, so it's about our buildings and our places where we work. So there's all that work, and then there's all the work we do around duty of care, which is looking after our contributors on and off screen. So it's sort of a massive job, but I have a brilliant, brilliant team, so I'm very fortunate. But also, what I think that I bring into the role from my diversity, equity, inclusion background is that sort of preoccupation with culture and how we drive change. And that comes through in everything that I do. And so, whether it's about recruitment, it comes through, whether it's about making sure our buildings are accessible, it comes through. So, all those things sort of come through. And one of the things that I was struck by when I first joined the executive committee at ITV as the chief diversity officer was how many things were relevant to the work that I was doing and how important it was to have me sat at the table, but also how important it was for other people to be sat at the table to represent the people who weren't round that table.
Yeah, and it makes me think, slightly about our work around accessibility. Depending on who we engage with or who we talk to, people think it's a website, right? Or people think it's a building, or people think it's, a HR policy or strategy, rather than realizing the connectivity between it all. But to your point, that it is culture that's the engine that drives that system change. But we did a piece of research with people who are blind and low vision some time ago, and one of the participants said this quote that I will never forget, which is that accessibility is like a sandcastle. Unless you keep minding it and rebuilding it, the waves will wash it away. And
Mhm.
it reminds me similarly of like workplace culture, right? It's not something that's static. It's not something that you just create and it doesn't ebb away or it doesn't change or there isn't risk of losing it. So, you know, I guess I'm thinking about the people who are joining us, and we have people joining us from real estate. We have people joining us from, here in New York, we have people joining us from technology spaces. From your own perspective, as regards to maintaining or accelerating that culture, is there anything specific you think people should keep in mind or be very focused on, particularly in this moment?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's sort of lots of things that, and we're on a journey like all organizations, but there have been some things that have really sort of helped propel us forward. So, one thing that we do in the television industry is that we work with other broadcasters. So, for example, when we're making television programs, of course, we're in competition with Netflix, who I know Bella's worked for, and with the BBC, we're in competition with them. But when it comes to sort of trying to change the world around accessibility, we often work together and learn from each other. So we have something called the TV Access Project, which is something that's a cross broadcaster. So I would say to people that aren't in broadcasting or television to think about how they can work with other people in their sector because I think we're stronger together. So that's a really important thing. I think that also I've learned a lot personally from people generously sharing their lived experience with me and saying, actually, when I come into the building, the way that door works, it doesn't work for me. And so I think creating a culture where your staff and your colleagues will be honest about what does work and what doesn't work. But of course, you have a responsibility. So when something doesn't work, you've got to fix it. You can't just go, oh, thanks. You've got to be committed to fixing it. So I think those sorts of things work. And we've also, I know lots of people have staff networks, and we've learned a lot from our, employee resource groups. And a couple of years ago, we did a leadership scheme for deaf, disabled, and neurodivergent people, and that was a real that really had an impact beyond just the people that were doing it. It had an impact on our senior leadership team because they were all being sponsored by someone on the ExCo or the PLC board, and just learnings about how you have people with different needs coming together and make a space that's accessible for everybody. When you see that in micro, you think, how do we scale that up so that all our meetings and everything we do is run like that? So those are just a few examples. And one of the things I would also say as well is that when it comes to all the interventions that we do around accessibility, genuinely, it usually makes it better for everybody. So the example that I use, I worked in the Paralympic Games many years ago in Rio, where we took one of the biggest production teams of disabled people to Rio. And because of the various different adjustments, people used to have to finish on time. So everyone's shift had to finish on time. So we all benefited from that. It meant that everybody's shift finished on time. So there are lots of examples about that, like that, that will make it a better place for everybody to work. And I really believe that, else I wouldn't do it. Because the reason I do this work is because I think it makes things better.
Yeah. And that it's, measurable. And as you said, sometimes when it comes to either accommodations or adjustments, it is about an individual, but sometimes those scale up to be beneficial and valuable for everybody. And I think it's about figuring out that matrix in any organization as to when we do both. But it really is, as you said, about kind of driving that culture and also creating leadership programs. For me, one of the things that I have a great appetite for is how do we create disabled leaders?
Yeah.
When we think about representation, so much of our focus has been about getting disabled people into employment, which is really important. But we then don't talk about retention or promotion.
Mm.
We don't talk about disabled people being trustees or on boards. So learning about that is brilliant. I want to ask you maybe more specifically, because this is something that we are having a lot of conversations about, which is around reasonable adjustments and reasonable accommodations. From your vantage point at ITV, how is the organization approaching reasonable adjustments, and what does the policy and process look like, even at a high level? And I guess what does success look like? And being mindful that particularly within the UK, access to work is available and is an option, but which might require some explanation for some international people who are joining us. But what does that look like for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, we are a disability confident employer, so so we sort of, so I think there's on the one hand, there's the processes you put in place. So there's a whole load of processes that we have in ITV around, when you arrive in the organization. So one of the things that we've implemented for all people, so is that when you arrive, you talk about what it is you need. And so that's a universal thing that's rolled out. We call it an access passport, but everyone that arrives would get that. So that's one thing that we've done. So I think there are things that are around the process where, you have access to work. And one of the things that pieces of work we did is we found that there were parts of the business that were really good at access to work and could help people and knew how to do it properly. And there were bits of the business that were really terrible at it. So we had to sort of look at that and do a sort of continuous improvement process to make sure that the onus wasn't on the individual and the organization knew how to do this effectively. So we did all those sorts of things. So I think there's all the processes, and I feel pretty confident that our processes are getting better all the time. But I do think there's something more than just the processes. It's about the people and how the people implement those processes, because sometimes the process is not enough. Sometimes it's about how people interact and what they're willing to share. And I think one of the things that we've really worked on is giving people confidence to be upfront from the beginning about what it is they need in terms of reasonable adjustments. And we're fortunate because we're a big company, so we have sort of no excuse to provide it because we're, a big company and we have lots of resources. And but one of the things that we found often is that the reasonable adjustments don't often cost lots of money. And people often think it's going to be lots of money, but it often isn't. It's often about thinking about how do we make this experience of work equitable for the person. It might be working different hours, it might be working from different locations. So often the things are not expensive, but if they are expensive, we're fortunate that we're a company that can afford those.
Yeah, and I think, from us, our practice is kind of the baseline understanding that disabled people live in a world that wasn't designed for them.
Mhm.
Purpose of reasonable adjustments is to acknowledge and accommodate for that and to allow people to do their job. And, I know that the law around expectations for disabled people and reasonable adjustments is different in different parts of the world, but it really is about setting somebody up for success to be able to do that role. And a lot of the conversations that we've been having with employers recently is how do we create more centralized models of funding for reasonable adjustments and accommodations rather than it all sitting with HR or being
Yeah.
interdepartmental? And then also, how do we create legacy memory? Because some of what we see is that, for example, an employee will say that they need a reasonable adjustment, and depending on the maturity level of the organization, that line manager will go and speak with HR or go and speak with legal. And all of a sudden, it's 12 weeks before
Mm.
that person has had a response. And then they're in the midst of their probation period, they're failing, and then they're let go in the organization. So how do we, if we know, for example, that security systems allow Grammarly, how do we just make that available to everybody? How do you buy a license that makes it available to everybody or makes it available easier on request? So I think it's like, how do we codify policies and processes? Because to your point, you can have a process that says if you need something, click here, but how do we accelerate also the kind of human aspect? People are often cautious who
Mm.
are supporting reasonable adjustments, but how do we also make sure that the disabled employee is central and included rather than somebody that we communicate to at the end when everybody else has talked about them? I do want to get to kind of the wider industry. I'm conscious we've been very focused, and kind of zoned in on ITV, but if we could go up to like 30,000 feet for just a minute, in terms of the wider industry, both in the UK, but also globally, from your own networks and engagements, where do you think television and maybe some film, but particularly television, is kind of currently positioned with this, psychological safety and people feeling comfortable and confident to share their disability identity? Do you have like a temperature sense on that?
Yeah, no. So can I just go back very quickly
Yeah,
just to the
please.
other thing you said, because I think the thing that you were talking about before about sort of how do we make it so that people have the things they need to succeed in the workplace. I think a lot of that is around leadership and leadership ed education and what it is to be a leader. And we've done a lot of work around inclusive leadership and educating our leaders because I think that's really, really important because the shadow they cast on what people feel they can talk about and what we value as an organization is a really big one. So we've done a lot of work on that. But anyway, in an answer to your question, I think that if we looked sort of at the industry, I would say that we have in the time that I have worked in the industry, my perception is that things have improved, but that we still have further to go, is what I would say. And I think that what I'm starting to see is networks of disabled people who are empowered and vocal and who are coming together to, if you like, to sort of to I guess the word is to advocate for one another. So I think that's a really, really good thing. So rather than organizations doing things to disabled people are advocating for each other. So I think that's a really powerful thing. So I think this network of senior people who are doing things in the industry. I mean, if you think about just our output, we've sort of made things like the Assembly recently, which is, very senior disabled talent behind the scenes, and Code of Silence, disabled talent working on those. But those are shows that we couldn't have made without that talent because it wouldn't have had the authenticity that you get when you watch it, where you see all these casual things. I mean, there's one brilliant quote that I love in Code of Silence where Rose Ayling-Ellis' character is complaining about the subtitling on TV being too slow, so she's not going to watch the TV program. Now, you wouldn't get that insight without lived experience. And so, one of the things that we want to do at ITV is we want people to enjoy watching our content, but we also want them to learn about other people's experiences by watching it, but in a very natural way. And I think this is what we get by having a broader range of disabled creatives sort of controlling the narrative on the shows that we make.
And maybe just to share in terms of Code of Silence, to your point, Rose Ayling-Ellis is the protagonist and the lead, and she's a deaf British woman who, uses BSL as her first language. And, having, as you said, deaf narratives play into the content is so important. But I also think about the many disabled people who were involved in production and commissioning of that show, which also transformed it. I think I heard anecdotally that it was like one of the most disabled people on set ever, and multiple access needs and having to figure out the matrix of that. And again, access or representation, not just being something we see on screen, but that's kind of threaded through. I want to kind of come to our last question before we bring Bella in. But, you know, thinking about who's watching this webinar now and who will watch it back on the recording, what from your practice and from your experience would you encourage other HR professionals and leaders to adopt to ensure that success of disabled people in the workplace? I know you spoke about the accessibility passport. Maybe you can share some more information about that, or thinking about kind of employee networks. But is there anything that you would encourage this audience to kind of go and put into their practice?
Yeah, I think that one of the thing I think that sort of in terms of I think it's really important to measure your progress. So I think that if you're an organization, you should be collecting data around the people you have in your organization, and you should be looking at where the gaps are, and then you should be actively, if you have underrepresentation of disabled people, you should be actively looking to fill those gaps by explicitly looking in networks where there are more disabled people and thinking about how you can access disabled talents. I think you have to be really proactive in looking for underrepresented voices. So I'd really encourage people to do that. And I would really encourage them to measure their progress because I think that's really important. And organizations that don't have disabled people in them, they should try and find and work with people that have lived experience that they can share, whether that's through expertise or whether it's through working with consultancies like yours. But I think it's really important that disabled people are always part of the conversation. And I think the final thing I would just say is, look, there's a real opportunity. I mean, just the conversation that we've just talked about, we've got a hit show. We wouldn't have that hit show if we didn't have access to disabled talent who could bring us stories and tell them in a way that we haven't seen them before. And for a creative organization, that's why we exist.
And the hit show both drives audience, but
Yeah,
also revenue, right? So as we think about, again, just different reasons why this work is important. Addie, I'm going to, like an ITV
yeah,
reality show, turn your light off
yeah.
and introduce Bella to come back on. But Addie, thank you so much. And maybe just to kind of give some last context to Addie's points there around kind of measurement. We're having lots of conversations around the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, which is now delayed to 2028. But if you're based in the EU, in just a few years, organizations will be asked to be publicly reporting the representation of disability across their organization. And what we're finding is lots of companies coming to us saying, hey, do you do work on disclosure? And disclosure is but one part of it. But how do we go backwards, think about psychological safety, think about the definitions of disability that we're using, thinking about the questions that we're engaging people with, but also whether or not the organization itself is set up for disabled people to be successful. So to Addie's points, this isn't something that kind of exists in a silo, but it will become more and more part of the ways in which we work. But I very much feel like a TV host today. I'm moonlighting, at least in different roles. I am so pleased to be welcoming for the second section of our webinar, Bella Roberts. For any of you who follows Bella on TikTok or on Instagram, I, at least myself, have learned a huge amount from her content, both in terms of what it is like to be house hunting in London at the moment, but I think more specifically what it means to be a disabled person, but what it means to be working in post-production, particularly as an editor, what it means to be growing your career in real time, and just the challenges that exist, but also the opportunities. And Bella has had a huge number of projects already under her belt, whether it's Adolescence, which you may be familiar with from Netflix. I know she's worked with ITV and BBC and others, but really the purpose of today's conversation with Bella is to try to gain more realistic understanding of what it's like within the TV industry, where we need to go, but also, hopefully we can all continue to follow her content and learn more about her work. But Bella, I'm going to throw to you for a visual description first, and then I'll come back for my first question.
Hi everyone, I'm Bella Roberts. I'm a cis woman in her early 20s, wearing my famous black cap that says "just roll with it" and a blue striped rugby top with a white shirt. Oh, and a white.
Great.
Sorry, my description was so bad. I'm so sorry.
I liked it. Bella, I'm having a little bit of interference with audio. I'm not sure if it's with your headphones.
Oh.
So Bella, I'm going to let you, while you're on mute, I'm going to let you fix your headphones, and then I'm going to ask you the first question. This is Access in Motion. So, Bella, I guess, and I will elongate out this question to give you time to fix your audio, but, your identity and lived experience as a disabled content creator shapes the stories you tell. What I would love to know is, can you share how those experiences influence the kinds of narratives that you're most drawn to for yourself in your own kind of content creation, but then maybe also thinking about the projects and the work that you're drawn to?
Yeah, I'm sorry. You're gonna have to say that again, just because I missed it. I'm so sorry.
Oh, good. The audio is much improved, so thank
Is
you.
it better? Is it better? My
better.
bad. Sorry, guys.
All good. Access in Motion. So, your identity and lived experience as a disabled content creator shapes the stories you tell. What I would love to know is, can you tell me a little bit more about, what are the experiences that influence the narratives that you're most drawn to, and maybe even what stories you don't want to tell?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think the narratives I'm most drawn to are Definitely the most authentic ones. You know, I think growing up with television and film, I mean, I grew up in like the early 2000s. So I think representation was slightly better, but definitely still needed a long way. So I think for me, like, I'm most drawn to stories that are authentic, that feel real. You know, that could be like real characters. A great example, forgive me their name, but there's a show called Sex Education on Netflix, and there's a character called, I want to say Isaac, but what I believe he's a wheelchair user, and his character was just fantastic because it just shows that, like, disabled people can be, you know, not very nice people, you know, they're not necessarily always the nicest people, and it just felt real. And that was the first show. Well, obviously there's many other shows, but for me particularly, because that show came out when I was, you know, in my late teens, I was like, wow, this actually feels real, because like disabled people can be rude, as they're not always inspirational, like the media often portrays. And yeah, I think the stories that I'm not necessarily drawn to are, yeah, I guess the tropes about disabled people that, you know, you see in media all the time. Yeah, hope that helps answer my question.
I was late to Sex Education and loved it. And, you know, the character
Yeah.
you're talking about and the actor George Robinson, who played that character so brilliantly. And I will say, you know, for knowledge, my experience with George is that he's a wonderful person.
Oh, yes, of course.
Despite his character. But I think it is that point of, you know, again, what does representation look like and mean? And whether it is through, you know, narratives that we've been previously exposed to, and you spoke to inspiration porn. So maybe just to share, inspiration porn is the narrative that disabled people exist to inspire non-disabled people. It is that idea that, you know, the audience leaves with the sentiment of, oh, well, if a disabled person can do that, why can't I? Or I should be able to do that. And it really is, you know, Stella Young's kind of theory, which is around, you know, disabled people do not exist just to inspire. We exist as full and human beings and have the right to do so. But I think it's interesting to your point around that just full character piece. And, you know, one of the real reasons why I really wanted to talk to you today, Bella, was, again, when we think about representation in TV and film, and we think about disabled people, you know, we often think about on-screen talent. We often think about actors, which is very important. We then sometimes think about writers and directors, but we don't ever really get to talk to those who are in post-production. Maybe because there isn't many disabled people, maybe because they don't feel safe talking about their disability. But I'm really glad that we're having this conversation, which, you know, I don't know if it was Sex Education that inspired you, but when did you realize you first wanted to become an editor? And how did you get into editing, and what made you kind of choose this career and path?
Really lovely question. I think for me in particular, you know, I'm sure many disabled people can relate to this, but I grew up like in and out of hospital, like my whole childhood. So when you're in hospital, like literally the only thing you can do when you're bedbound is watch movies. And I used to religiously watch movies, and I joke because my mum used to get these DVDs from a corner store from a guy who would sell DVDs in those plastic wallets. And I think they were like 99p or something. And you would play them and they would scratch and they would break halfway through. But, you know, I was a sucker for them. And I used to watch them on my little portable DVD player. And there was one film, obviously, you know, Mamma Mia, which I know is like not, you know, the most cinematic movie. But I just loved it. And, you know, that scene where Meryl Streep is singing The Winner Takes It All on that, you know, Rawcliffe in Greece. And just the drone or the, I don't know what it was, but it was just like a camera that's constantly moving out, and then it goes to like a wide. And I don't know, something about that stuck with me. And then I used to watch a lot of the behind the scenes videos, and I just got really interested in how these films actually came to be. And then, yeah, I struggled a lot in school, but the one thing that I felt that I was really good at was filmmaking. Discovered it when I was in sixth form, and then went to film school. And then I was editing YouTube videos when I was like 13. And that's actually how I learned to edit, through making my own cringy YouTube videos. And then over time, yeah, that developed into a full-blown passion. And now it's my full-blown career. And I'm just so grateful for that. And, you know, I kind of think back to, you know, growing up in hospital and feeling like I, you know, wasn't at school and I couldn't catch up with my friends. But I always had movies and they meant so much to me. So yeah, that's sort of how I got into it. And I just fell in love with editing. I'm a whiz at the computer. I grew up around technology. I mean, I was the first generation to grow up with iPhones. So like, I feel like that kind of speaks for itself. So yeah, that's sort of how I fell into editing, really.
I love that Mamma Mia was your starting point. I think that many people who are watching this who, you know, maybe wouldn't admit to knowing exact scene that you're talking about on Cliff in Greece. But I love that that was what kind of ensnared you. And I should probably say, for legal reasons, that Tilting the Lens doesn't condone pirating of film.
Oh yeah, definitely not.
We've all seen DVD-ROMs in plastic wallets.
Yes.
To your point that, you know, every disabled person has their own, oftentimes, interactions with the medical model, right? And I think it's really wonderful to hear that actually that time sparked ideas, opportunities, and innovations for you, but also the idea of self-learning, right? That it was through YouTube that you learned how to edit, and the number of productions and projects that you've worked on at a global scale because of that self-teaching. And I think, again, for many disabled people, the education system can be really inaccessible. And many of us have transference of skills. Many of us, our lived experience is that expertise and in intellectual property. But I want to kind of just not necessarily pivot, but we talked there a little bit about your career as an editor in TV and film. But you, like many of your generation, have more than one career and also have, you know, a very large social media platform across, you know, multiple different, whether it's TikTok or Instagram, as a content creator also. But, you know, when I look through some of your content, and I'm not cool enough to be on TikTok, but, you know, they're like humorous, they're authentic, they're really honest about your journey in the media industry, but also your journey in life. You know, I guess, how has this way of sharing experiences helped shape your creative practice?
Yeah, it's a really lovely question. I think for me, doing content allowed me to reach an audience that I never thought I could reach. And it actually helped me find work because I don't know why I started social media on specifically Instagram. I think because my YouTube was failing. So I thought, plan B, you know. So I moved to Instagram. And yeah, I think for me, I looked around and I realized there wasn't really anyone, at least in the UK, talking about post-production specifically in a film and TV space. There was a lot of, you know, creators talking about editing, but never really like professionally how you do it in film and TV, I mean. And yeah, I just thought, you know what, if no one's gonna do it, I'm gonna do it. And for me, I think like authenticity is so important on social media. I like to think that I'm the same in person than I am on camera. I think I hope that it was helpful for people to show that not only someone coming into the industry, but also someone who is disabled coming into the industry, which I don't think I've personally never seen. And it wasn't always my intention to come into content and be that voice or in the disabled community, but it just so happened to be. And yeah, I love making content. It's given me a lot of opportunities. And I think authenticity is so important. And for me, I like to be real on social media because why lie? Why lie and say that it's easy and you know, everyone can get in? Because it just creates false hope for students that are coming in. And it's brutal, and you know, it's you know, you're gonna have to make a couple cups of tea and coffee, but I like that it's realistic, because I even had people coming up to me in the street saying, oh my gosh, I didn't know that I had to make coffee and tea coming into the industry, and now I feel prepared going into this job. And some people even said that they use my videos to research, like, for their job interview. And I was like, whoa, don't take mine like as a golden rule. But I think knowing all of this and getting messages from people, I think that was a space that, or a gap in the market that I felt like it really needed to be filled. And I really hope more content creators make content about this. But I think with NDAs and all of that, it makes it really, really tricky. So I try my best to navigate that while still being authentic. I'm sorry, I totally did not answer your question, but I sort of went on a deviation there.
You did, and I think, you know, NDAs are non-disclosure agreements. So what they often are is, you know, a legal document that prevents you from talking about the work that you're in or naming the project. Sometimes do it at the end when it's completed, but sometimes not. And, you know, I remember watching your content when you were a runner, and I remember being really taken by, and probably not in a good way, all of the cups and teas and the coffees, and thinking about or imagining myself in that role. So, you know, you might be making teas and coffees for people on set, and that is what happens when you are, you know, entry level into the industry and the business. And I remember thinking, gosh, I would really struggle. I would really find this challenging. And I don't know if it's a reasonable adjustment to be able to say, I can't make teas and coffees because it's part of a runner's role. But I found it so useful and illuminating, to your point, of the realities and the practicalities, and how often, you know, you are the person who has to advocate for yourself on set of what your limits are and what you can or can't do. So to your point, I think it's been very useful for people. And what I wanted to ask you was just kind of drilling down more into representation. And you talked earlier around sex education as a good example, you know, and we've kind of talked a lot today in general around how representation is often confined to who we see on screen. But I think, you know, what does authentic representation mean for you, not in front of the screen, but behind the scenes? And how can we have more of that? How can we encourage those who are watching to have more of that?
Yeah, no. You know, representation behind the screen is just as important in front of the screen. I still feel like we have a long way to go, but it's so important for authentic storytelling. You know, if you're making a story that is about disabled people and their lives, and you don't have a single disabled person behind that camera, cancel the show. You know, throw it in the bin. You know, I think it's so important, and I think it's a shame, you know, people don't want to include disabled people behind the camera, because we have so many good stories and so many lived experiences that can, you know, give that story that authentic edge, and will help stay away from all the tropes about disabled people. Yeah, and I think to get more disabled people into the industry, I think for me personally, I got in through the BBC Access scheme, which was I want to say like one of the first ever of its kind with the BBC. So there's like the BBC comedy scheme, which is like a scheme in itself that's been running for many years. At least I think it is, don't fact check me. And then a guy called Gareth Hill, who's a really good mentor of mine, he set up this access scheme. And that he only set it up because he had lived experience with a child with a disability. So it makes me think like you really got to have people almost in the inside to set these schemes up. What I would really hope is more schemes like this, because as far as I know, I don't know if they've done it another year, but in the scheme that I was on, there were only 2 people that could come in that scheme. Think of 2 disabled people in the whole country. That's insane. Like, obviously it's great, but like there is so many more disabled talent out there, and there shouldn't just be like one scheme and then like that's it, cool, job done, dust the fingers, happy days. There should be more schemes, and I think specifically, like you said, the running that you said you might struggle. You know, I personally did struggle. I only lasted for 2 months because I found it very physically challenging for me. Although on camera, I like to seem that it was really easy, and you know, but like, oh, you know, my my manager would joke and he would be like, "You're having your sit down time, Bella," and I was like, "Yeah," you know, because I had a little stool in my kitchen that I would sit down because my feet would just hurt so bad. But I had it in my head, and I was like, you know what? As disabled people, I feel like you have to mask a lot and you have to pretend. And I just knew that if I just stuck it out for 2 months, whatever, you know, it could give me the leg up I needed and be the same as everyone else. But I wish that didn't need to be the case. I wish, considering post is what I like to think the most accessible department in the industry, at least I think for me, like all you have to do is sit down by a computer for 10 hours a day. Why is there not schemes that could just bypass the runner stage and go straight into assisting? Because we need assistance, And I think that's already a barrier in place for disabled people, especially people who are physically disabled, to even get into the industry when it's so drilled into you that you need to be a runner and you need to make coffees and teas. What do we do with people who struggle physically to be able to do that? How can we make it better? And for me personally, I would love if there were more schemes in place that would just skip the runner stage and go straight into assisting.
I think that is such an excellent takeaway, and I think it's absolutely relevant to post-production, but I think it's relevant to so many other
Of course.
different jobs, because I think about how, you know, the definition of success for so many disabled people is that they can do everything that non-disabled people can do, but that isn't necessarily fair, because it doesn't acknowledge that the system or the task is not there for everybody. So I think, yeah, I will absolutely, this will be one of the things that I take away from this conversation. But Bella, I'm mindful that we have a captive audience, right? And
Oh,
you're
of course.
currently on your job, right? But this is your opportunity. What types of film or TV projects are you most eager to work on in the future? This is
Ooh,
name, I don't know,
okay.
you name it. Tell me, what are you eager to work on?
Okay, I'm going to manifest it right here.
Do it.
I would love to work on a musical film. I love musicals.
Mamma Mia, of course.
Yeah, Mamma Mia, round 3. No, I mean, I loved Wicked this year. I love In the Heights, the movie. Anything music, I love music. So like anything that I could cut to. I mean, even you know, my great inspirations are like Edgar Wright films. If you don't know Edgar Wright, he did like Shaun of the Dead, Baby Driver, Hot Fuzz, those types of films. But his style of editing is very much like cutting to music. And I love like anything like that. And comedy, I love comedy. So like, I've just so many fun ideas to do with comedy. I kind of want to make my own stuff, to be honest. I think I'm going to manifest being my own producer and edit my own stuff and include cool representative stories that actually are real and funny without it being you know, a stereotype. So yeah, I would love to edit musicals, I'd love to edit comedy, but honestly at this rate, at my early stage of my career, any job with money would be great.
I like that we have, you know, swung the pendulum of expectation there.
Yeah, you know, we've got to keep it real.
I feel it's very accessible, Bella. So thank you. Keeping my fingers crossed for, I don't know, some sort of Mamma Mia Part 5 in terms of,
Amazing. I'll be there, don't worry.
I love it. I love it. You know, I want to take this opportunity, Bella, to thank you. We're going to welcome Addie back, and this is the opportunity for those who are in the audience. If you haven't yet had the opportunity to ask your question that we're going to present both to Addie or to Bella, depending on who it's asked for, please do. I would encourage you to ask it in the Q&A section rather than the chat box, just to be able to help us manage, but also to particularly be mindful of anybody who's using screen readers and to be able to support kind of less noise in the chat box. So I would encourage you to use the Q&A, but already we have some really brilliant questions. This question I think could be for both, but specifically for Addie. This comes in from Amy. Addie, how do you know what adjustments are reasonable for production or post-production? And I have an energy limiting condition and I don't know what I can ask for, or if it's very realistic to go into this industry, but this is my dream. Do you have any advice? And Bella, you may have some thoughts on this.
Yeah, so what I think it's a really good question, and I think what is it's sort of thinking how you could do that role. So I think you have to, you know, think about what you would need in order to do that role. And it's sort of so things like I've known of people that have edited as job shares, so you don't have to do the full day. So it's sort of thinking about what it is that how you could do it, but without knowing exactly what you can do, it's really hard. But what I would say with all these things, that if you have a passion for doing something, you should give it a go. And sometimes people start off on one path and they get to that path, but sometimes they don't end up on that path because they find something different. But I wouldn't sort yourself out now at this stage, is what I would say. But I'm sure Bella has got better advice on this than me.
Yeah, and Bella, maybe just before you jump in, I would just kind of say that, you know, access is contextual. So whether you are, you know, somebody who is approving reasonable adjustments or accommodations, or whether you're a disabled person, the access you need in one room may be different to another room. And I think it can be very hard for a disabled person to know what's available. There's no menu. right? But what I would say is try and think of a list of what are the immediate things that you need that would help you be successful. But also thinking about employers, can we share more imagery of office spaces? Or Bella, your point of sitting at a desk for 8 hours. What does that chair look like? What are the options that are available? What does the room look like? How do you get in? So that people can actually ask better questions and be more informed. Often what we find is that somebody will ask for 2 reasonable adjustments. We'll start, those don't really work. They then need 3 or 4 more because they're figuring out the environment. And that creates a frictious relationship with lots of people. But Bella, do you have advice?
Yeah, no, I'm sort of going through it right now with my new job, asking for accommodations. And I'm sort of a bit lucky because I don't know what stage you are at, but I'm at a stage where I have to do all the ordering. So what I did, which is not necessarily advisable, but I just would buy my accommodations with the company card. And then if they were against it, I'd be like, well, it's accommodations, what are you going to do? Yeah, so I wouldn't recommend that. But sorry, I'm a bit cheeky. But I think at this stage, like most productions I found are really welcoming. So don't be put off by feeling like you're scared or you're worried to ask for accommodations, because most production companies, like I've worked for ITV, I've worked for the BBC, I've worked for Netflix, and every production I've ever been on, when I've asked for accommodations, they have gone, okay, cool, what do you need? How can we sort this? And so I don't think you should feel worried or anxious or anything, because if it's a good production company, then they will go out their way to do accommodations, because it's the law also. You've got to think about that. They have to legally make reasonable adjustments. And if they go, oh, look, sorry, we can't help you. But I also think, just really quickly, just think about jobs like in a realistic sense. Like for me, I know I have limits. Like I know I won't actively take a job on a Mount Everest because I can't climb Mount Everest, you know? So just think about in your head, like, okay, cool, these are jobs that I can do and I'm going to apply for these ones. But most of the time, productions are super welcoming, but you have to ask for them. Productions are not mind readers. They won't know unless you tell them. So yeah, I'm sure you'll be fine. And chase those
Guys,
dreams.
yeah,
Please,
can I just add one tiny thing as well? Just that one thing that's happening more and more in our sector. I don't know if you've had experience of this, Bella, but we have the access coordinator, and that sort of helps because that's someone that can broker these conversations because they're experts in their field and they can often broker the conversations for you.
Addy, you've timed up my next question beautifully, which actually comes from Sarah in the audience about access coordinators, and it's to Bella. You know, Bella, Sarah's saying we find with our access coordinator clients that they rarely get to interact with productions in post, despite always flagging that support continues beyond filming. Has Bella ever had this offered to her on any projects? And could she give us any thoughts on ways to reach that end of the process?
Yeah, no, that's a really, really good question. I've personally never come across an access coordinator in post. I've come across one on ITV, shout out, but that was when I was working on set. And I didn't even know they existed because I was not even in the loop that that role even existed, because I was talking to someone about, oh, I need these access requirements. And they're like, oh, just ask our access coordinator. And I was like, wait, you guys have one? Yeah, I think I would love to see access coordinators in post, but I think because post is already an afterthought in the production stage, I think it's going to be a long time till that happens. I really hope it does, but generally, you know, post producers, they do their best, but they're not, you know, totally clued up with when it comes to access stuff. How I hope it changes in future, I'm not sure, because it all depends on budget. And you know, when you just go, oh, can we have another role for this thing? Productions go, oh, how much that's going to cost? It's not necessarily, is that important? They go, that's another role we're going to have to pay for. And when post is already squeezed with budgets, yeah, I can't say how close it's going to come, but for me personally, I hope it comes, because I've never come across an access coordinator in any of the post jobs I've worked at, but fingers crossed it happens soon.
Right. And I think Sarah has put her contact details to be able to engage and get in touch. One follow-up question for you, Bella, from Aoife. She says, hi, Bella, when you started working on set, did you have an access rider?
An access writer. What do you mean? Sorry.
Access rider. Sorry, that's my Irish accent.
Oh,
not
apologies.
access
Access
rider.
rider. What does that mean?
So if
Explain
you
it to me.
think
I might know.
if you think about how Oscar award-winning celebrity or actor might have a rider, which is, it could be something like the types of furniture that they need, or blue M&Ms, or something in their trailer to make them, more comfortable. That's often how a rider is considered. But people, whether it's, talent or whoever it might be, sometimes have an accessibility rider. So I'll give you an example. I have an accessibility rider for travel. So if I'm traveling for clients or with work, I have a document that's sometimes in my contracts that talks about the kind of hotel room that I need. So I sometimes need a footstool, or it's the type of access support that I need while flying. It is to give people that information in advance to support me having to do the labor or the emotional work of constantly having to advocate for myself. So that's what an access rider is.
Okay, yeah. Thank you for explaining. Personally, no, I've never had that. Mainly out of fear that if I bring up the fact that I need these access, things before a job has been signed and before a contract has been signed, they might go, "Oh, sorry, we found somebody else," So, I hope that I get to a point in my career where I'm a bit more confident to ask in advance. But right now, no, I don't have that. But one day, hopefully, I will.
Thank you. And I hope that we all take away, we need to create a template access rider for different jobs and different careers so that we can kind of put them in. One of the things that I wanted to ask, we have a question in the chat, and it kind of sparks from the conversation, Adi, that you and I had up top, which was, the question comes from Suleiman, and it's, how can we unapologetically center accessibility only for disabled people beyond the accessibility benefits everyone narrative? And I think this question, is really interesting, and I have heard it a lot and experienced it a lot, particularly from the disabled community. And I think it's absolutely right. It's trying to balance the argument that disabled people have a right to be accommodated, and that should not be only because it benefits everybody. But in large organizations, when we're trying to create rationale for headcount, or we're trying to create rationale for budget, that sometimes what wins certain people over, leaders, etc., may be that this works for everybody. But is there a risk, I guess, in having that narrative that we, I don't know, undermine the needs of disabled people? I don't know, but I think it's an interesting kind of challenge around how we do both. And I wondered if you've any guidance or thoughts on that.
I think I agree with the point. I think we should be unapologetic in terms of putting disabled people and their access needs first. I mean, Bella touched on it. If we don't make reasonable adjustments, we're breaking the law on one level, but also we need to be able to give people what they need, or facilitate the adjustments so I don't think that what disabled staff need should only be done if it works for the whole organization. I think that would be ridiculous, and that's not what we would do at ITV. We would always be led by the needs of and the adjustments of the individual person. And I think that's why it's so important, as we were saying before. I was really struck when you were talking about role models and seeing people behind the camera. And I think about it not just in terms of behind the camera, but having people in senior leadership positions within your organization and the impact that has for people in the organization. And so, no, I think that if you have to choose one, it's what the disabled person, the adjustments that they need that comes first.
Thank you both. I want to end with a question that Angela asks. And Bella, you talked earlier about Mamma Mia and about sex education, but I want to think about kind of your earliest memory. So Angela says, I'm curious if any of the speakers remember their first experience of seeing disability representation in TV or film media. I grew up seeing so little disability representation, or in some cases unauthentic, that I find great joy in finding positive and authentic representation. Addie, do you remember your first?
My first positive representation
Yeah.
screen. Gosh, the first thing that I saw, um, of disabled representation.
Yeah.
Gosh, I'm just trying to think the first one. I'm very old. You go, Bella, and then I'll come back.
Honestly, I'm a bit stumped as well. I
feel like
think,
I have to come back to you both.
yeah, I mean, like, I can think of a lot of negative representations that I remember growing up with. But, you know, obviously it's not necessarily positive.
Well,
I
maybe
honest,
if I could make a suggestion, we're going to be sharing the recording, the transcript. We are
Sure.
going to have it on our website. We'll put it in a newsletter. So maybe if I could give you both homework, and maybe
Yeah.
who are watching, if you could put your examples of your first representation of disability in film or email it to us, we will collate all of them together. We'll put it in the article. So if you can't think of it now, give you some time, reflect back. And Angela, we will take your questions with us and put everybody's answers. So if I could ask you to send them to us, but I want to be mindful that we are at time. I want to thank our interpreters. I want to thank our captioners. I want to thank everybody who has joined us today at this hour. But I particularly want to thank Bella and Addie for sharing so much practical and useful guidance with us. I have really learned a lot. I also want to thank Emma, Laia, Rowena, who are in the back end. I want to thank Emmy and Orla, who are at the front at Tilting Lens, making sure that everything runs smoothly. We will, as I said, have this available as a recording and in your inboxes within the next week. But thank you for joining us. We are also in the midst of collecting ideas for the next round of webinars. So if you have a suggestion for a webinar that you would like us to create or feature, please do let us know. We have a form on our website that we can guide and direct you to. But thank you all so much for your time. I hope you have a lovely evening and a lovely rest of day. But thank you, and we'll see you all very soon. Thank you so much, everybody.